Dawn breaks over Jerusalem, painting the limestone walls blood red. The city stirs, unaware that before this day ends, the universe itself will shudder. In a Roman fortress, soldiers prepare for another day of maintaining order during the busy festival. On a hillside outside the city walls, the place of execution stands ready for any who might be condemned. In the temple, priests prepare for Passover, oblivious that the ultimate Passover lamb will soon be slain. From his sleepless night of interrogation, beaten and bound, Jesus of Nazareth watches his final sunrise. The machinery of execution moves with cold efficiency now. There's urgency in every step. The religious leaders need this troublemaker dead and buried before sunset, when Sabbath begins. They don't realize they're participants in a cosmological drama written before the foundations of the world. This is no ordinary execution. This is the linchpin of history, the moment toward which all prior moments have been building, and from which all future moments will flow. Welcome to Good Friday, the day when hatred and love met on a cross, when death and life collided, and when darkness seemed to win, but only for a moment. Good Friday unfolds as a day of brutal contrasts between Roman power and divine submission, religious self-righteousness and genuine holiness, human cruelty and divine mercy. While Jerusalem bustles with Passover preparations, the greatest act of redemption in cosmic history is happening in plain sight, yet almost entirely unrecognized. By Jewish reckoning, the day begins at sunset and runs to the next sunset. Hours were counted from sunrise, approximately 6 a.m., so the first hour was around 7 a.m., the third hour around 9 a.m., the sixth hour noon, and the ninth hour around 3 p.m. During this span of a single day, Jesus will endure 6 trials, brutal scourging, public humiliation, and execution. The Gospels record 7 last phrases from the cross, capturing the physical, emotional, and spiritual dimensions of his suffering. For the religious authorities, the day carries a sense of desperate urgency. Having arrested Jesus the previous night, they need to eliminate this threat to their power and prestige before the Passover celebrations fully begin at sunset. This haste explains the illegal nighttime proceedings and the pressure they place on Pilate for a quick execution. For the disciples, scattered and hiding throughout the city, it's a day of crushing disillusionment. The man they believed was the Messiah, the one who would restore Israel's glory, is being executed as a common criminal. Their 3-year journey appears to have ended in catastrophic failure. But beneath these human dimensions, cosmic forces are at work in what appears to be God's ultimate defeat, but will prove to be his most profound victory. The night had brought no rest for Jesus. After his arrest in Gethsemane, he had endured a series of hastily arranged illegal trials. First, questioning by Annas, the former high priest and father-in-law of the current high priest. Then, an informal nighttime trial before Caiaphas and some members of the Sanhedrin, where false witnesses contradicted each other, and Jesus was condemned for claiming to be the Son of God. As dawn broke over Jerusalem, the full Sanhedrin convened to formalize their decision, providing a veneer of legality to what was, in reality, judicial murder. Jewish law prohibited capital trials at night, so this morning meeting was essential to create the appearance of justice. Their verdict confirmed, they needed Roman permission for execution. Jewish authorities under Roman occupation couldn't implement capital punishment themselves, so they bound Jesus and led him to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, at his headquarters. Here another striking contrast emerged. The Jewish leaders, so concerned with ritual purity before Passover, refused to enter Pilate's headquarters to avoid ceremonial defilement. So Pilate, likely irritated at the early morning disturbance, came out to them. "What charges are you bringing against this man?" he asked. Their initial response was vague. "If he were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate, unimpressed, replied, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." "But we have no right to execute anyone," they answered, revealing their true intention. When pressed for specific charges, they shifted strategy. Religious blasphemy meant nothing to the Romans, so they reframed the accusations in political terms. We have found this man subverting our nation. He opposes payment of taxes to Caesar and claims to be Messiah, a king. Pilate took Jesus inside for private questioning. Are you the king of the Jews? Is that your own idea? Jesus asked. Or did others talk to you about me? Am I a Jew? Pilate replied. Your own people handed you over to me. What is it you have done? Jesus answered, My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest, but now my kingdom is from another place. You are a king then, said Pilate. You say that I am a king, Jesus confirmed. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. What is truth? Pilate retorted, perhaps the most ironic question in history, asked by a man staring truth itself in the face. Finding no basis for charges, Pilate attempted to release Jesus, suggesting a Passover amnesty. But the crowd, increasingly hostile and manipulated by the religious leaders, demanded the release of Barabbas, a convicted revolutionary and murderer, instead. Learning Jesus was from Galilee, Pilate saw another potential escape route, passing responsibility to Herod Antipas, the ruler of Galilee, who happened to be in Jerusalem for Passover. Herod questioned Jesus at length, hoping to see a miracle, but Jesus remained silent. After mocking him, Herod sent Jesus back to Pilate, still unsentenced, but rapidly running out of options. Frustrated by the escalating situation and hoping to satisfy the crowd without executing Jesus, Pilate ordered him to be flogged, a punishment so severe it was sometimes fatal on its own. Roman flagellation was conducted with a specialized whip called a flagrum, featuring leather thongs with shards of bone and metal embedded in the tips. Each lash tore away flesh, turning the back into a bloody mass. The scourging Jesus endured would have left him in shock, severely weakened from blood loss and pain. But the soldiers weren't finished. Taking him into the Praetorium, the governor's headquarters, they gathered the entire company around him for improvised entertainment. They stripped him and dressed him in a purple robe, the color of royalty. They twisted together a crown of thorns and pressed it onto his head. They placed a staff in his right hand as a mock scepter. Then they knelt before him, shouting, "Hail, King of the Jews!" While striking him in the face, spitting on him, and taking the staff to hit him repeatedly on the head, driving the thorns deeper. The mockery combined physical torture with profound humiliation. The soldiers unwittingly enacted a parody coronation ceremony, dressing Jesus in the symbols of the kingship they ridiculed, not realizing they were clothing him in the emblems of the authority he actually possessed. Pilate made one final attempt to avoid crucifying Jesus. Bringing out the battered, bleeding prisoner wearing the purple robe and crown of thorns, he declared to the crowd, "Behold the man, ecce homo." Perhaps he hoped the sight of Jesus so brutally punished would satisfy their bloodlust. It only inflamed them further. "Crucify, crucify," they shouted. "Take him yourselves and crucify him," Pilate responded in frustration. "I find no basis for a charge against him." The Jewish leaders revealed their real concern. "We have a law, and according to that law he must die, because he claimed to be the Son of God." This statement unnerved Pilate. Taking Jesus back inside, he asked, "Where do you come from?" Jesus gave no answer. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate demanded. "Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you?" Jesus replied, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." Pilate was now desperately looking for a way to release Jesus. But the Jewish leaders played their final card. "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar." This was a thinly veiled threat to report Pilate to Rome for failing to suppress sedition. Already on thin ice with his imperial supervisors for previous missteps, Pilate couldn't risk such a report. Bringing Jesus out, he sat on the judge's seat and proclaimed, "Here is your king." "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate asked. The chief priests gave an answer that revealed the depths of their spiritual bankruptcy. "We have no king but Caesar." In a final symbolic gesture, Pilate called for water and washed his hands in front of the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. It is your responsibility." The people shouted back words that would haunt Jewish history. "His blood is on us and on our children." So finally, Pilate handed Jesus over to be crucified. The soldiers then took off the purple robe, put his own clothes back on him, and led him away. The religious leaders had won their victory. The machinery of death would complete its work before sundown. Severely weakened by the scourging, Jesus carried his cross toward the place of execution. The path from Pilate's judgment seat to Golgotha, known as the Via Dolorosa, way of suffering, wound through narrow Jerusalem streets for approximately half a mile. For a man in Jesus's condition, each step was agony. When it became clear Jesus couldn't continue under the weight, the soldiers randomly conscripted a passerby, Simon of Cyrene, coming in from the country, to carry the cross for him. This North African man, father of Alexander and Rufus, mentioned by name in Mark's Gospel, suggesting they later became known members of the early church, found himself unwillingly thrust into history's central event. Along the route, a group of women beat their breasts and wailed for Jesus. Turning to them, he said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children. For if people do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry?" Even in his agony, Jesus looked beyond his own suffering to the coming judgment that would fall on Jerusalem in 70 AD. The procession included other condemned men, 2 criminals sentenced to die alongside Jesus. Roman practice often grouped executions for maximum public impact. 3 crosses meant 3 examples made, 3 warnings delivered to anyone contemplating resistance against Rome. They reached Golgotha, the place of the skull, a small hill outside Jerusalem's walls. Here, at approximately 9 a.m., the 3rd hour in Jewish timekeeping, the grim work of crucifixion began. The condemned were typically offered wine mixed with myrrh, a mild analgesic to dull their senses. Jesus refused it, choosing to face death with full awareness. Unlike the typical Roman practice, where victims were nailed to the crossbeam on the ground before it was hoisted onto a permanent post, Jesus' crucifixion involved the complete cross he had carried. After laying the entire cross on the ground, the soldiers stretched Jesus' arms across the horizontal beam. Iron spikes, 5 to 7 inches long, were driven through the wrists but possibly the palms. Then the entire cross with Jesus attached was raised and dropped into a prepared hole, causing excruciating shock as it jolted into place. His feet were then nailed to the lower portion of the vertical beam. The mechanics of crucifixion were designed for prolonged torture. The victim's weight pulled down on the arms, quickly causing shoulder dislocation. To breathe, the crucified person had to push up on the nailed feet, scraping the scourged back against the rough wood, creating an agonizing cycle of pain with each breath. Eventually, asphyxiation occurred when exhaustion prevented this pushing up action. Above Jesus' head, Pilate had ordered a notice to be fastened, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews," written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. The Jewish leaders protested, "Do not write the King of the Jews, but that this man claimed to be King of the Jews." Pilate's reply was curt, "What I have written, I have written." The soldiers divided Jesus' clothes among themselves, casting lots for his seamless undergarment, fulfilling the prophetic words of Psalm 22, "They divide my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment." From the cross, Jesus looked down at this scene of human depravity and spoke his first words, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Even in unimaginable pain, his response was mercy. As the hours passed, Jesus spoke 7 times from the cross, words of profound significance that have been meditated upon for centuries. "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Even as nails pierced his flesh, Jesus' first thought was forgiveness for his executioners. To the repentant thief crucified beside him, who asked to be remembered in his kingdom, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." In his own agony, Jesus offered comfort and salvation to a dying criminal. Seeing his mother Mary and the beloved disciple John at the foot of the cross, "Woman, here is your son, here is your mother." Even while dying, Jesus ensured his mother would be cared for, creating a new family born not of blood but of faith. Around noon, the 6th hour, darkness fell over the whole land, lasting until the 9th hour, 3 p.m., a supernatural sign that something cosmically significant was happening. Then a heart-wrenching cry in Aramaic, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani," my God, why have you forsaken me?" quoting the opening of Psalm 22. In this moment, the eternal Son experienced separation from the Father, bearing the full weight of humanity's sin. "I am thirsty." This brief statement fulfilled another prophecy and revealed Jesus's very real human suffering, the tissue damage, blood loss, and exposure causing intense dehydration. Someone soaked a sponge in wine vinegar, put it on a stalk, and offered it to his lips. After receiving the drink, "It is finished." One word in Greek, tetelestai, a commercial term meaning paid in full, as might be stamped on a debt certificate. The work of redemption was complete. The price for sin was paid. Finally, with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." Not the whisper of the defeated, but the triumphant shout of one who had accomplished his mission. Then, defying the normal pattern of crucifixion where victims lingered for days, Jesus gave up his spirit, choosing the moment of his death. The timing was significant, around 3 p.m., the exact hour when Passover lambs were being slaughtered in the temple. Jesus, the true Lamb of God, died at precisely the right moment. Nature itself convulsed at the Creator's death. The midday darkness gave way to earthquake, rocks split, the massive temple veil, separating the holy place from the most holy place, an enormous curtain approximately 60 feet high, 30 feet wide, and 4 inches thick, tore from top to bottom, symbolizing the new access to God opened through Jesus' sacrifice. Matthew's Gospel records that tombs broke open, and the bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life, entering Jerusalem after Jesus' resurrection, a foretaste of the general resurrection to come. The earthquake and darkness terrified onlookers. A Roman centurion, witnessing Jesus' manner of death and the supernatural events, exclaimed, "Surely this man was the Son of God," a profound confession from a pagan soldier. The religious leaders, however, remained focused on their ritual concerns. Jewish law prohibited leaving bodies on crosses during Sabbath, especially a high Sabbath during Passover. They asked Pilate to hasten the deaths by breaking the victims' legs, preventing them from pushing up to breathe, thus accelerating asphyxiation. The soldiers broke the legs of the 2 criminals, but finding Jesus already dead, pierced his side with a spear instead. Blood and water flowed out, medical evidence of death by cardiac rupture, with fluid collected around the heart and lungs. John, an eyewitness, emphasizes the historicity of this detail. The man who saw it has given testimony, and his testimony is true. With evening approaching and Sabbath about to begin at sundown, the urgency that had driven the day continued. 2 unlikely figures stepped forward, wealthy, respected members of the very Sanhedrin that had condemned Jesus. Joseph of Arimathea, described as a good and righteous man who had not consented to their decision, boldly asked Pilate for Jesus' body. Nicodemus, who had first visited Jesus by night years earlier, joined him, bringing 75 pounds of myrrh and aloes for burial. Together, these secret disciples took Jesus' body down from the cross, quickly wrapped it with the spices in strips of linen, and placed it in Joseph's own new tomb cut from rock in a nearby garden. They rolled a large stone across the entrance just as darkness fell and Sabbath began. Several women who had followed Jesus from Galilee, including Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, watched the burial location, planning to return after Sabbath with additional burial spices. Their devotion would make them the first witnesses to an even greater miracle. The religious leaders, still uneasy despite Jesus' death, approached Pilate with one final request: "Sir, we remember that while he was still alive that deceiver said, 'After 3 days I will rise again.' Give the order for the tomb to be made secure until the third day. Otherwise, his disciples may come and steal the body and tell the people that he has been raised from the dead." Pilate provided a guard of soldiers and authorized sealing the tomb. In supreme irony, Jesus' enemies took his resurrection prophecy more seriously than his own disciples, who remained in hiding, their hopes crushed. As Sabbath descended on Jerusalem, the tomb lay silent. The machinery of death had completed its work with cold efficiency. The carpenter from Nazareth was dead, sealed behind stone. To all appearances, the movement he started had died with him, yet Sunday was coming. Good Friday confronts us with the scandal of a crucified God. The ancient world found this concept absurd. Divine beings were powerful, distant, and certainly not subject to humiliating execution. Yet in this apparent defeat lies Christianity's revolutionary heart, God's power revealed through weakness, victory achieved through surrender, life emerging from death. Some modern scholars suggest that Jesus, like other condemned criminals in Roman times, carried only the horizontal crossbeam, patibulum, to Golgotha, where an upright post already stood. This view emerges from archaeological findings and Roman accounts of crucifixions, where efficiency-minded soldiers reused the vertical stakes. While this perspective helps us understand Roman execution methods, the weight of history and tradition points to a different, more profound reality in Jesus' case. The Church has consistently held for centuries that Christ bore the entire cross, not merely a portion of it. This tradition finds support in multiple lines of evidence. When Saint Helena, mother of Emperor Constantine, journeyed to Jerusalem in 326 AD, she discovered what was believed to be the complete cross of Christ, fragments of which remain venerated in Rome's Basilica of Santa Croce to this day. The Gospel narrative itself offers compelling evidence. Roman soldiers compelled Simon of Cyrene to help carry Jesus' cross, an intervention that makes little sense if Jesus were bearing only the more manageable crossbeam. The tradition of Jesus falling 3 times under his burden, memorialized in the Stations of the Cross, speaks to a weight far greater than a single beam. Perhaps most tellingly, the Romans sought not merely Jesus' death but his complete humiliation. The crown of thorns, the mocking purple robe, and the public spectacle of forcing the King of the Jews to drag the entire instrument of his execution through Jerusalem served their purpose of maximum degradation. In the economy of salvation, there is profound meaning in Christ shouldering the full weight of the cross, an emblem of the complete burden of human sin that he willingly carried. The entire cross, crushing and complete, better symbolizes the totality of his sacrifice than would a mere fragment of wood. The paradox of Pilate's behavior reveals the compounding tragedy of political expediency overshadowing justice. The Roman governor, clearly convinced of Jesus' innocence, attempted multiple evasions, sending Jesus to Herod, offering Barabbas as an alternative, even symbolically washing his hands of responsibility, yet ultimately delivered an innocent man to torture and death rather than risk his own standing with Rome. Meanwhile, the soldier's mockery, the crown of thorns, the purple robe, the theatrical genuflection, represented not merely random cruelty but a calculated political statement. By parodying Jesus' kingship, they asserted Rome's absolute authority and the lethal consequences of challenging imperial power. This mock coronation reveals something profound about the nature of earthly power, its deep insecurity, its need to humiliate what it fears, and its ultimate emptiness when confronted with true authority. Jesus, accepting both the compromised justice of Pilate and the deliberate cruelty of the soldiers without retaliation, establishes a new kind of power, one that conquers not through domination, but through steadfast love that endures even the worst humanity can inflict. The centurion's declaration at the foot of the cross, "Truly this man was the Son of God," stands as one of history's most profound conversions. This Roman officer, whom tradition would later name Longinus, witnessed not merely another execution, but something altogether different in how Jesus died. As the Gospel accounts tell us, this hardened military man observed Jesus' death and the supernatural events that followed, the midday darkness, the earthquake, and recognized divinity where his training had taught him to see only weakness. Christian tradition expanded his story further, identifying him as the soldier who pierced Jesus' side with a spear, received healing from an eye affliction when blood and water flowed from the wound, and later became a passionate evangelist. Some traditions even identify him as Cornelius, the Roman centurion in Acts 10 who became the first Gentile convert. Whatever the historical details, this soldier's transformation remains profoundly symbolic. The very empire that executed Jesus began to bow before him within moments of his death. The centurion stands as a powerful witness that even at the moment of apparent defeat, the cross was already doing its redemptive work, drawing the most unlikely hearts toward the crucified God. Perhaps most profound is what Good Friday reveals about God's character. When humanity did its worst to God, mocking, torturing, killing him, God responded with forgiveness rather than vengeance. The cross is where justice and mercy meet, where God absorbs the violence of the world rather than returning it. This reveals a God unlike anything human religion had previously imagined, not demanding sacrifice from humans, but becoming sacrifice for humans. As night blankets Jerusalem, the tomb lies silent and sealed. Roman guards keep watch, their torchlight flickering against the massive stone. Inside, wrapped in burial linens, the body of Jesus lies motionless in the darkness. The disciples remain hidden behind locked doors, their dreams apparently buried with their master. The women prepare burial spices for use when Sabbath ends. The religious leaders celebrate Passover, believing they've eliminated a dangerous threat. All appears lost. The story seems to have reached its tragic conclusion, but God's greatest works often happen in darkness, unseen by human eyes. While the world sleeps, the Father has not abandoned his Son to the grave. Deep within the sealed tomb, something impossible is stirring, a divine power that neither death nor hell can contain. The machinery of death, so efficient in its work, is about to encounter the author of life himself. Join us for Holy Saturday, the day of sacred silence and waiting, and then for Easter Sunday, when the greatest miracle in human history bursts forth in the garden, when mourning turns to astonished joy, and when it is finished, gives way to He is risen. Darkness falls at noon. From the cross come words that chill the blood of any who know the Scriptures. My God, why have you forsaken me? These opening words of Psalm 22 reveal the spiritual agony of the cross, the mysterious separation between Father and Son as Jesus bears the weight of human sin. Written centuries before crucifixion was invented, this prophetic psalm describes with uncanny accuracy what Jesus now experiences. All who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. They pierce my hands and my feet. They divide my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment. Yet even in this darkest moment, the psalm moves from desolation toward hope. For he has not despised or scorned the suffering of the afflicted one. He has not hidden his face from him, but has listened to his cry for help. When we face our own moments of abandonment or suffering, Psalm 22 reminds us that Christ has been there first. The cry of desolation is not the final word. Even in apparent defeat, God is working his purpose out. Future generations will be told about the Lord. They will proclaim his righteousness, declaring to a people yet unborn, he has done it.
My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me, and from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry in the daytime. night season, and am not silent, but you are holy, enthroned in the praises of Israel. Our fathers trusted in you. They trusted and you delivered them. They cried to you and were delivered. They trusted in you and were not ashamed. But I am a worm and no man, a reproach of men and despised by the people. All those who see me ridicule me. They shoot out the lip, they shake the head, saying, he trusted in the Lord, let him rescue him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him. But you are he who took me out of the womb. You made me trust well on my mother's breasts. I was cast upon you from birth, from my mother's womb. You have been my God. Be not far from me, for trouble is near, for there is none to help. Many bulls have surrounded me, strong bulls of Bashan have encircled me. They gape at me with their mouth, like a raging and roaring lion. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax, it is melted within me. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue clings to my jaws. You have brought me to the dust of death, for dogs have surrounded me. The congregation of the wicked has enclosed me. They pierced my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones. They look and stare at me. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. But you, O Lord, do not be far from me. O my strength, hasten to help me. Deliver me from the sword, my precious life from the power of the dog. Save me from the lion's mouth, and from the horns of the